بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الذين كفروا سواء عليهم أعنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون ختم الله على قلوبهم وعلى سمعهم وعلى أبصارهم غشاوة ولهم عذاب عظيم ومن الناس من يقول آمنا بالله وباليوم الآخر وما هم بمؤمنين يخادعون الله والذين آمنوا وما يخدعون إلا أنفسهم وما يشعرون في قلوبهم مرض فزادهم الله مرضا ولهم عذاب عليم بما كانوا يكذبون وإذا قيل لهم لا تفسدوا في الأرض قالوا إنما نحن مصلحون ألا إنهم هم المفسدون ولكن لا يشعرون وإذا قيل لهم آمنوا كما آمن الناس قالوا أنؤمن كما آمن السفهاء ألا إنهم هم السفهاء ولكن لا يعلمون وإذا لقوا الذين آمنوا قالوا آمنا وإذا خلوا إلى شياطينهم قالوا إنا معكم إنما نحن مستهزئون الله يستهزئ بهم ويمدهم في طغيانهم يعمهون أولئك الذين اشتروا الضلالة بالهدى فما ربحت تجارتهم وما كانوا مهتدين صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you very much. Brothers and sisters, the next part of the program is the main talk by Mehreen Khan, who is speaking to us on truth in the time of turmoil, journalism, its identity and integrity. Please welcome her with loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Mehreen Khan is a no-nonsense journalist who is economics editor at The Times, where she interviews some of the most senior people in finance in the world. Most famously, she wrote an opinion piece at the Financial Times calling out Prime Minister Macron of France for his anti-Muslim policies. That led to Macron writing into the Financial Times to attack her, and the Financial Times pulled her article rather than defending her journalism. She left when she saw how the Financial Times chose power over truth and got a senior role at the Times. This is the person coming today, and please welcome her with loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm very sorry that I'm late. I was defeated by the Metropolitan line. So, but it's, I'm really glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me and for everyone being here. I know it's Friday night and it's sunny outside. When Miqdad got in touch and said that, would you like to come and chat to us, I didn't really know why anyone would be interested in the stuff that I do. I think newspaper journalism, there's a lot of younger people here. They probably, like these little kids over here, I've got cousins my age, and they ask me, what do you do for work? And I say, I work for a newspaper. And they say, what's that? So it's become like it's clearly a legacy. I work in the legacy media, and it's increasingly difficult commercially, but also just as an industry, I'd say it's in crisis. It's in a moral crisis, and it's in a commercial crisis. So I appreciate that you guys are, interested enough to want to hear anything that I have to say. I know that the title has the word truth in it, and that's quite it's quite a tricky burden that's put on journalism, but I think it harks back to a time where we did believe that journalism was about trying to get to some degree of truth and objectivity. And I think I've entered this profession at a time where that's become much harder to achieve. And even the idea of that we do anything that looks or sounds like truth, if you've been following any news coverage in the English-speaking world since what happened in October the 7th, it feels like a bit of a stretch to even try and get to that level. So yes, there's a moral crisis, there's a commercial crisis, there's a crisis of people's ears and eyes, because all of you guys here read and consume media that's not the traditional media, the media that I've been working for. So I joined the Telegraph as a young journalist on the sports desk because I wanted to be a football writer. And I realized that it was a bit too much of a racist and sexist environment, so I didn't stay in sports journalism. I then became a business journalist, and then I moved to the FT, where I worked for 5 or 6 years, mainly in Brussels, writing about Europe, and then I moved to the Times. So it's generally the places I've worked have been on the right and the centre-right of the spectrum, sometimes even liberals. So it gives me a certain perspective on like what that kind of environment is like, and how I think attitudes towards Muslims. My big takeaway is going to be that nothing has really changed from probably the years or months after 9/11. That was that was my first exposure to journalism when I was a kid. So I was around 10 years old in 9/11, and I realized that the media has a very important role to play in sort of shaping narratives about Muslims, incredibly powerful narratives about Muslims that affected basically my day-to-day life and the day-to-day lives of my family and my friends. So I never went into journalism with this idea that it's this fantastically noble profession where you speak truth to power. I actually probably went into it thinking this is an incredibly corrupt moral institution, and it has had such a deleterious impact on the way that I live and how I consider myself, my self-identity as a Muslim, growing up in the kind of securitized age of the 2000s and then going on to the 2010s and being in newsrooms and being asked to explain ISIS and apologize for every terrorist attack, all things that I'm sure people here have been doing. So in a sense, I'm not going to be here to sort of defend the traditional media at all. I also wouldn't describe myself as a whistleblower, but maybe I can just give some sort of perspective on how I think what kind of environment the media is becoming. And a couple of days ago, I don't know if you guys know, but the Centre for Media Monitoring had their sort of a big report out about the experiences of Muslim women in journalism. And I was lucky enough to be able to take part in that. And a lot of women came forward, and sort of there was a lot of pain and a lot of emotion about how much Muslim women inside newsrooms or news environments really suffer at the hands of their editors, at the hands of the storytelling, and how it's become a hostile environment for so many Muslim women. I have to say that I have been incredibly lucky, alhamdulillah, that I haven't experienced so much of the sort of nastier points of being in newsrooms, but I completely understand where these narratives come from. And I think my takeaway from that couple of hours talking to the women and the report was that if I have to describe what it means for me to be a Muslim, it is probably the constant need to feel estrangement from the world. That's sort of how I know that I'm doing something right in the world. And I said it to a couple of days ago that if you're in a newsroom after October the 7th in the UK or the US, you will feel the most profound sense of estrangement, possible. There is no weirder place to be in a news environment with editors talking about how they want to cover what's happening in Gaza, and realizing that when they tell us black is white and left is right and the sky is green and that water, everything is upside down. And so that deep, profound sense of estrangement that you get from a newsroom is actually very fortifying to me in terms of my personal faith. And that's why I tell people who want to go into journalism, and if there's anyone here who's interested in journalism or wants to get into it, you should see your Muslimness basically as a superpower in journalism. Because your ability to stand apart from the things that you cover, your ability to not feel like you're part of the story, that your sources are not your friends, that you don't write for the people that you like, the ability to take some degree of distance to what you do is basically the essence of what I think makes good journalism. And so in that sense, people say that it must be really hard to be a Muslim journalist. And I was like, no, it's very easy to be a Muslim journalist, because I see that there's a massive Venn diagram where there's two parts of, feeling a constant need to be disenfranchised, and estrangement is a professional, is very helpful for me professionally. So that's sort of the optimistic take why I think Muslims should be journalists, and why Muslims are actually great journalists. Because this inability to be clubbable or to feel like you have to fit in to achieve whatever, career progression you want, is something that I think that as Muslims we understand that need to fit in is not something that we should also want or crave. It's probably more harmful for us spiritually than it is anything else. And having a profession where that's very important means that I think it has helped me, it has fortified my deen to the extent in which, you know, I can now look back on and think that this is how I want to stay. This is why I want to stay in this kind of profession. We mentioned Macron. Maybe I'll just talk about it. One of those very deep feelings of estrangement was when I wrote an opinion piece, which often in British journalism, even if you're a news reporter, you're allowed to have opinion pieces. There's not really a strict limitation. That's true of American journalism, but it's not really true of British journalism. And I've often written about Islamophobia in the West, about issues of the hijab, issues about the burkini, a lot of issues around Europe, primarily around the sort of terrible French debate about Muslimness and how to police Muslimness. And the piece that I wrote was effectively just saying that, you know, the way that the Macron government thinks about counterterrorism is unhealthy because they cast the net of criminality very widely. So they describe Islamism as like people eating halal food or having multiple wives or covering up or wearing the hijab. And if the crime is to be an Islamist, then you're basically criminalizing most of the normal, visible parts of Muslimness. That was the point of the piece, and it made the French president very, very angry. So angry that it, you know, caused a huge stir within the sort of editorial leadership of the FT, and they removed the piece from the website and said that there was factual inaccuracies, which obviously I disputed because you can fix them. If you can fix factual inaccuracies, you don't have to delete things off the website. It's a very kind of Stalinist approach to fixing things that you think are not correct. And then I think the more telling episode was that Macron then wrote in the pages of the FT an opinion piece about me, to a piece that was no longer, technically doesn't exist. And in that piece, he basically did exactly the kind of things we're all used to, which is this kind of dog whistling about the fact that Muslims have dual identities and we have split loyalties. I think he accused me of having ideological motivations, which is like the nice way of saying that she's basically, you know, what now people say are pro-Hamas or pro-brotherhood or whatever, that I don't have the ability to be objective because of my name and my background and my religion. So he was saying that I was basically disqualified from journalism because of my background. And that, you know, that's a normal thing that I've encountered in most journalistic spaces, people basically telling me, you know, a senior editor once told me that I'm disqualified from being a journalist if I believe if I believe in God, because I have no objective grasp on reality. Now, these are all like crazy things to hear, and I'm telling you these things because they sound like, you know, they sound almost unconscionable, but they're quite normal. And I think it's important for younger Muslims, especially when they're getting into the media, to sort of understand this and also to have the weaponry and the language to counter this. And my counter, and I gave this example a couple of days ago, was that I was also at the FT when Brexit happened. And the FT is a very pro-European, probably the most pro-European British newspaper. That's part of its DNA. And on Brexit night, it was a very sad night. People were crying all over the newsroom. Right, it was 4 o'clock in the morning, and there were people in tears because they had suffered probably the biggest political defeat of their life, and they generally felt like, as people, they'd lost something. That by losing membership of the European Union, they'd lost part of their identity, their children had lost something about their futures, they'd lost something much bigger than just, you know, the news. And then I saw all these crying dudes go back to their desks and write stories about Brexit. And I'm supposed to assume that they are going to take a neutral, objective, truth-telling approach to the Brexit story when I know that this is the most personal thing that's ever happened to them. So the idea that you're disqualified from being objective because part of your hinterland or part of your political identity is about the thing that you write about doesn't apply to white liberals when it comes to things that they care about, but it always seems to apply to Muslims. And this is the kind of level of like the double standard that I, you know, just casually throw in there to remind people that there is nothing about me that's non-objective because of my background. Because if I'm going to be disqualified from journalism, then you guys are also going to be disqualified from writing about the biggest thing that's ever happened in British politics for like half a century, right? Brexit. So we should all bear that in mind. And I like to be on the front foot. Obviously, I'm a little bit aggressive. I like trolling people. You know, I like using my Muslimness to make people feel uncomfortable, to remind them that I am Muslim, to remind them that there's always going to be an estrangement between me and them. And that's very healthy with your sources. That's very healthy with your readership. It's not always great, probably professionally, in terms of getting on or, you know, trying to make, I wouldn't even say make friends. And maybe my final thing will be, and I'd love to just hear if anyone has any questions, the reality is that in this kind of job, you do almost have to be perfect. You have to be better than everyone else because there's probably not going to be a second chance. And I learned that a little bit with the Macron episode, where I was considered to be, somebody that had a great future at the FT, and all of a sudden it was gone. And the one issue in which it sort of all fell apart was because I chose to speak out about liberal racism. I didn't choose to speak out about the far-right racism. I didn't choose to speak out about Le Pen or Farage or Trump or Boris Johnson on the right of the spectrum. I chose to speak out to exactly my readership and the sort of people who want to see their names in the FT in positive light. I chose to go after my tribe, right? The tribe that I was working for. And that is always a pretty high-stakes game, as I learned. But I think that's where, if there is some degree of truth-telling or objectivity, often when it comes to us trying to understand why we need the world to be better, I don't want liberals to acquiesce to racism. I want them to understand that they've been part of the problem for so long. And everything that's happened after October the 7th is a clear vindication of that. That so much of the trusted liberal progressive media that we all thought was sort of kind of on our side really isn't. I point to the New York Times, the BBC, we all understand what I'm talking about. And maybe the truth-telling is when it's much closer to home. There's a much bigger burden to bear because of it, and you will press people's buttons, and it will be difficult, but I think it's worth it. And ultimately, if there are any well-meaning white liberals around, what I tell them is that I need you guys to be better, because ultimately I'm not going to be pitching my political wagon on the far right to get to achieve what I think is better foreign policy or better economic policy. So you guys do have to be better. It is a very tough message for them to hear, but. Usually the responses are like 80% of people put their fingers in the airs, and then there's like 10% who tell me more, and then there's like the other 10% who really already understand that this is a problem. So yeah, that's kind of my précis of some of the things that maybe people find interesting about my job. We can also just talk about what it means to be a reporter or writing about economics. I don't know if anyone wants to ask any questions. I mean, I can keep yapping forever, to be honest. So. I probably should stop.
Thank you very much. It's a great introduction. I think it's a great time to just open the floor for a bit of a discussion about journalism generally, and particularly with a focus on Muslim journalists. Any questions or comments to start us off?
Over there?
Thank you very much, Mehreen. I know it's not easy to be at the Times, even that you are writing about economics rather than other things. But have you ever felt that you are not welcome at the Times, or they would rather see you away? I mean, I'm surprised about the Financial Times, because the Financial Times, I thought might be able to tolerate that, with Rula Khalaf and others there, but I'm quite...
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm just thinking, I'm on camera, right? Is this, what's the level of on background, off the record this is? We're being live streamed. Okay, cool. That means I have to be politically correct. I should have asked that question before. That was a rookie error. Honestly, I have never had a problem working for the Times. The Times wanted to hire me. Sorry.